Hello and welcome everyone to today's Fairy Godboss live webinar. We're so excited to have you all join us. I'd like to introduce myself to begin. I'm Gabby Caracciolo, Vice President of Client Operations at The Muse and Fairy Godboss. And for those of you who don't know, Fairy Godboss is the largest online career community for women. Millions of women visit Fairy Godboss for career connections, jobs, community advice, hard to find intel about how companies treat women within their organizations, and virtual events just like this. We're excited to kick off today's event, Navigating the Job Market. Recruiters share their tips on how to stand out, sponsored by Capital One. We're thrilled to be joined by three leaders at Capital One. We have Jessica, Sarah, and Dean. And I'd love if each of you would take a minute to introduce yourself. We'd like to hear about your role at Capital One and anything that you would like to share with us, both personally or professionally. Jessica, can we get started with you, please?
Yes, thank you. So excited to be here. I'm Jessica Riley Mazer. I lead our enterprise services talent organization. I've been in recruiting and talent acquisition for over 20 years. And I also like to say that it's not just my job, it's my hobby and my side gig. And you'll also find me scouring LinkedIn at night, looking at resumes. So I'm always recruiting.
I love that. Sarah?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sarah. I am our recruiting lead for some of our tech programs within students and grads. So what that really means is that I recruit for entry-level talent within the tech space. I actually started my career as a contractor at Capital One in the recruiting space and have kind of worked my way through the tech students and grads org. So now I primarily lead a lot of our strategy.
Amazing, amazing. What a career trajectory as well. That's fantastic. Dean?
Nice. Thanks, Gabby. My name is Dean Cholian. I am a principal recruiter over here inside of Tech TA. I have been in recruiting now for, oh my goodness, 15 years, 12 in tech. And I can't imagine a better spot to be in these days. The world is ever changing around us, and Capital One has granted me some amazing opportunities to deep dive to what's really important these days. Inside of Capital One's organizations, inside of Tech TA, I am a Tech TA diversity ambassador, and I'm also part of what's called the Positivity team, where we get to like spread cheer and like have lots of fun with the group. So I can't wait to deep dive into our conversation today. I'm really happy to be here. Gabby, back over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining. I am thrilled. This is going to be such a phenomenal, impactful conversation, and what experts we are excited to have here today. Let's jump right in, shall we? My first question is, how can applicants make their resume and skills stand out? It's tough to do in this marketplace. Jessica, what insight do you have for those who are in our audience today?
Yeah, so Gabby, this is a really great question that we get a lot in recruiting. And I think we look at it a couple different ways. The resume is really a tool, but it's a tool combined with your why, right? And so the resume should dive into your skills and competencies, but it really should also show your superpowers. And then what do you do differently than other people in your industry? It's really more than just keywords. And so I encourage all, individuals to take the time to really, when you're looking at your resume, find out what your why is and weave that into your resume so that it really stands out when you're applying for roles and then also when you're working with recruiters. And so not just like a standard resume, but add your superpowers, and that could be super powerful.
That's great advice. Sarah, you are nodding your head. Anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my answer might go very in line with kind of advertising your why. Two things that I tell candidates when they kind of ask, how am I going to differentiate myself from, the other applicants, especially in a really competitive role? The first is to write an objective statement. Obviously, if a role requires or an application requires a cover letter, please do what is required for that specific application. But if not, recruiters on my team really like to see a quick objective statement, 2 to 4 sentences that really outline why you're interested in this specific role within this company. I currently lead a program that's really competitive. And so we tell a lot of candidates, like, tell us why you're interested in this, not why you're interested in software engineering, not why you're interested in tech, but why are you interested in this specific role? And how do your skill sets really align to the role? What are you bringing to the table? So that's kind of my first piece of advice. Second is don't forget to highlight those extracurriculars, whether you're volunteering, you're a member of an organization, if you have a side hustle, like those are the kind of things that can also share a lot of your skill sets when it comes to collaboration, leadership, partnership, etc. And I think that can also really help you stand out from just, the typical background and skill set.
Really great tactical advice from both of you. Thank you so much for sharing some of that nuance. And yes, I see and read back in my recruitment days a lot of objective statements that are a little bit more general in nature, but taking that time to maybe customizing it a bit more to the specific role and opportunity that you're looking to pursue. It makes perfect sense why it would go a long way. Along the same lines of kind of standing out or diversifying your resume a bit, I'd love to ask more about how one can get noticed by recruiters on networking platforms. Any specific strategies for networking, especially in a virtual digital world that we're all working in today? And Dean, why don't we have you take the lead on this one if you don't mind?
Oh, sure thing. Thanks, Gabby. So one thing that I do, and I think it's very important, whenever you have your name listed there, or perhaps maybe just the first initial of your name with your last name to remove bias from the situation. A strong catch line is something that's actually very important because when you're looking at people in groups of 15, 20, they might say something along the lines of self-starter, looking to make a positive impact. I mean, that's great and all, but what would attract more people would for you to say something along the lines of highly skilled software engineering manager who specializes in Java, microservices, and AWS. You were specific, you were intentional, you're attracting those types of people, those types of recruiters that are specifically looking for you. So that's one thing that I would say definitely do. Have a strong catchphrase. The other thing I think that is important to do is to share articles, but share articles regularly on a platform. The one thing that people can see on a networking platform is to see if you're being consistent. Maybe you just started posting those articles because maybe you were recently laid off. We all saw what happened at the beginning of 2023. But this is something where future employers, recruiters, they can see if this is something that you're genuinely passionate about as well. And then last and not least, I would say when it comes to reaching out to folks on your networks, go with who you know first. Even though you may not think they might not be the direct person, that person can give you an amazing referral to get to that ultimate gatekeeper, that ultimate recruiter in the very, very beginning of the process versus wasting, 2, 3, 4 weeks on the process. So go with who you know first. And that is definitely the best advice I can give on networking platforms.
That's great. That's great. I need to be more intentional about frequently hosting and maintaining that presence and keeping on with the networking always, always. It's great advice, Dean. Jessica, Sarah, anything to add in that regard?
Yeah, I can add. So I think that candidates should follow recruiters and leaders at companies that they are interested in. So they should put together a list of these are the top 20 companies I'm interested in, and really be thoughtful in their list and do their due diligence, right, on the companies. And just to Dean's point as well, engage with content rather than just applying for a role. It actually starts before you apply for a role. And then candidates should also follow the company as well. And then the other thing is, if you're going to craft a message to a recruiter or someone that you're following on any of the platforms, you should be super thoughtful. At Capital One, we look for people that can solve problems, so really great problem solvers. And then maybe even before saying, oh, you have this role that I'm interested in, send a note to the person that you're following and say how you solve problems or what you can bring to the table. Do something different that will, help you stand out.
Another piece of advice I have, just to cut in here really quickly, is that a lot of companies have events that are listed on their website, recruiting specific events. Now that we've all kind of moved over to virtual, I feel like those happen more often than we think. And so definitely take advantage of those. A lot of times recruiters are in those events. It's much easier to then find them on LinkedIn. So definitely check out the company page and see if there's anything you can get involved in, virtually.
I would echo that same sentiment, Sarah. Thank you for making note of that, and agreed, right? Even events like this, right? We're learning so much about the organization, your values, what you're looking for from candidates, and it provides that inside look, an opportunity to really do that homework, do that research, and verify whether or not a company is the right fit for you. That's a whole part of what the mission of Fairy Godboss and the Muse bring to the marketplace. And so I really appreciate you pointing that out, Sarah. You mentioned problem solving, Jessica, as a trait that and characteristic or competency, if we want to call it as such, that Capital One looks for. What are some of the top qualities other than that you look for when interviewing a candidate? And to double down on that, how do you suggest candidates prepare for an interview at Capital One? And maybe Sarah, you can start us off with this question.
Yeah, absolutely. So when, phone screening and interviewing candidates, we're obviously looking to see if someone is a match for the role based on, previous experiences and skill sets. But I think one of the things we really value at Capital One is if a candidate is a culture add. So not only do they fit into our culture, but are they bringing something unique to the table that's actually going to add to our culture? So I think one of the things I tell candidates going into an interview is, really let your personality shine. Like that can be the difference that a hiring manager makes of, hey, I interviewed 5 candidates, but I really, love talking to this one. They just had such a great positive outlook on life. They had a really great personality. I think they'd be a really good fit. So that's one of the qualities that we kind of look for in the recruiting process. In terms of preparing for an actual interview, there's a few things there, right? I think the first is just review your resume. Really make sure that you can talk about your resume without having it pulled up in front of you. So kind of walking through each of your experiences, thinking about, kind of the obstacles that you overcame, projects you worked on, making sure that you're practicing those generic interview questions, around problem solving, leadership, collaboration. And the third thing is really just manage your nerves. Sometimes those can really get in our way. So I tell candidates, hey, take a deep breath. And also remember that you are interviewing this company just as much as they're interviewing you. So come prepared with some really thoughtful questions that's going to allow you to walk away from this interview feeling like, yeah, this is the company for me, or, hey, I didn't feel so great about this one, and I'm not going to be too nervous about it.
That's fantastic advice. That's fantastic advice and a really great strategy to keep in mind to help manage those nerves and allow that authentic personality to shine through, as well as all of those wonderful skill sets and core competencies that a candidate may bring to the table. Any other thoughts or perspectives on this question?
I'd like to bring up one point, and it's something we do here at Capital One, and I think it's actually quite powerful because it creates the proper lens whenever you're giving answers, and problem solving is definitely part of this answer, as well as Jessica done stating a few seconds ago. In Capital One's behavioral interview, the term I versus we holds a lot of value here. One of the biggest opportunities people have is when they interview with us and they talk about their team, they edify their current team. My team did this, my team did that. We did this at the request of our management team. And that's great and all when you're actually working in that place, but not when you're interviewing somewhere. What you need to do is you need to look almost inward, but show them how you provided value externally. So when you use the word I accomplished X, Y, Z. This made the impact by influencing management around me. I was able to gain the buy-in of my peers, which made the case for change that made it stronger to my direct manager. So what you're doing is you're showing them that you're able to problem solve by influencing the situation around you. And you almost want to give yourself the kudos versus giving your former team the kudos. And I'll leave us with this. We're not interviewing your team, we're interviewing you. That's the best way I can describe it. So keep that in mind whenever you're giving answers, whenever you're talking about influencing those around you. It helps out and goes a long way.
Really great advice. I heard that often when I completed interviews, and it was usually well-intended candidates, right, who wanted to be humble and collaborative and show the teamwork that went into the completion of a project or hitting a big goal. But to your point, this is the time to shine and really talk about your individual impact, your specific role, your contribution. So you could still articulate that in a humble way, but take the credit where it's deserved in the interview process. Great advice. Great
And
advice.
Gabby, I will just add there too, we can't overemphasize preparation.
Yes.
Preparation is key. We use the STAR methodology. So you have to sit down and understand, like, what was your situation? What was your event? How did you approach it? What was the outcome? What was the ROI? And so that requires you to sit down and write out, okay, what are my top 5 projects that I really want to decipher and understand? Like, where did I, work in areas of gray, and how do I get this across to the interviewer? And what is my leadership style, and how do I make that shine in the interview? This, you cannot prepare 24 hours before an interview. You have to take a couple of days and really sit down and map out what you want to talk about. And so we cannot overemphasize like how important the preparation is.
Great point. Great point. One of the questions we hear often is about how to craft a job application or a resume when there are gaps. And the gap can be due to a number of things, layoffs, personal reasons, and so on. I'd love to raise the question to this group. What is the best way to approach a gap on a resume? How would you address it? Dean, do you want to kick us off?
I'll kick us off. So whenever I see gaps in a resume, this is a lot different market than it was, say, prior to 2020. 2020 in recruiting, when we saw gaps in resumes, I really don't like to say it, but recruiters were very quick to dismiss a potential candidate saying, oh, they only worked, 14 out of the last 24 months, then 2 of them were contracts. Therefore, we don't want to move forward with the candidate. For the advice that I would give people is be as honest as possible, because when we speak to you, that's what we would expect, because most companies have high value marks here, and a Capital One or cultural bar is extremely high. But at the same time, if you're just upfront and honest that I needed time off or a mental break or something along that line happened, they don't have to get specific, and nor should you ask questions about it. But nonetheless, if you deep dive into just letting them know that you're a person, asking them questions with an empathetic lens as well, they will appreciate it more than everything, and you'll really set the tone for the remainder of their interview process as well. So whenever the best way to approach a gap on the resume, just be honest about it. That's all. That's it. Be honest. Done.
I will also add to that, Dean, if anyone finds themselves kind of in an unexpected gap, right? Because some gaps are expected and exciting. Some can be a little nerve-wracking. And so one thing we tell candidates is, hey, this could be a great time to just work on some projects, like personal projects. If you're taking up a new skill on Udemy, or if you are working on like a technical project, or if you're spending more time volunteering, like you can kind of fill in the gap with some of the things that you're doing, to still continue developing that isn't necessarily tied to a job.
That's great advice. And there's so many resources out there to upskill, to continue to develop those competencies, to stay in touch with happenings within the industry that you're working within, that there's plenty of opportunity. A follow-up question to that, would you recommend that a candidate denotes that on their resume? So Sarah, to your point, maybe there is an unexpected transition happening, but an individual is taking that opportunity to pursue a online course or to do some volunteer work. How would you articulate or kind of display that within a resume? What would your recommendation be there?
Yeah, I think it really depends on kind of what that, gap fill looked like for you. But for someone who's, maybe taking on some additional free coursework online, make that a section in your resume, under skills. So you can mark like coursework that you've done, and then even putting dates next to it as if it's almost like a role itself. That's a great way to highlight that on a resume.
That's great advice. To piggyback off that question, I'd love to learn what are 3 things about Capital One that you always make sure to highlight when talking to a prospective candidate? What's on your hit list of talking points when you're having those conversations?
Yeah, I can start here. I think the big 3 for me is our, diversity and inclusion initiatives. Talk about the 3 things that I like to highlight. I talk about them very candidly and how I've experienced them. And that being the first one that I really felt like I could, bring in my personal life, that my people leaders and my peers cared about what was happening, valued my voice and also valued our differences as well. The second is really the people, the people at Capital One. I've shared we do a pretty good job of trying to bring in those who are a culture fit and a culture add. And that was one of the first things I noticed when I first joined Capital One as a contractor, that, my team was really collaborative. They soon became some of my good friends. One of them even became my roommate and was a bridesmaid in my wedding. So I think we just have a really, really great culture here. And it's one of the things that I love the most. Probably one of the reasons I will stay with Capital One for a very, very long time. And the third is really our investment in our associates. So, I love to talk about the fact that you can do so much within Capital One. I am not stuck in recruiting or talent acquisition. If I wanted to go learn something or pick something new, we have a whole career development team that's dedicated to that. We have internal mobility, which is also dedicated to, horizontal shifts. And we also have some really great benefits. I think, especially as a woman, I love to talk about, how those benefits have impacted me from, whether it's really great maternity leave or surrogacy and adoption. I mean, I think it's connecting with candidates and just sharing candidly how our benefits and our investment in our associates has really benefited me.
Well, I'm sold. I mean, that's just wonderful. It really is apparent that the full person is being supported in your workplace and that you enjoy your time at the office, which is so important when you're spending 40 hours or so, give or take, a week at work. And you have found a career path that's fulfilling, that allows you that opportunity to continue to grow and stretch and learn. And it sounds like a multitude of different paths. So I appreciate you sharing your experience with us and with those who are listening in. I'm sure many are in my boat and taking notes and very eager to go check out the careers page. Any other thoughts or perspectives from the team on this question about what you like to highlight when you're talking with a prospective candidate?
Yeah, Gabby, I can add here. So I've been with Capital One for 5.5 years. And I think what is energizing to me, in addition to all the things that Sarah said, the people are amazing, but the work itself, right? It's super energizing. It kind of feels in the area that I'm in, like a little bit like a startup mentality, but in a large corporate environment, because you're solving really difficult problems that are not easy. And so that really energizes me. And the thing is every week is very different. Like, you don't know what you're like, you open your laptop on a Monday and you're like, what am I going to get into this week? And that's really energizing. And so, we want to have people here that like are energized by that. Like, how are we solving our problems? How are we collaborating? And so it's always very different. Whereas sometimes you could feel like you're in a role and you're doing the same thing over and over. And to also Sarah's point, like, there's such great internal mobility that like you can be in talent acquisition, or you can become an HR partner, or you can go over and become a project manager. And so that's what's really exciting. And that's why you'll see a lot of people stay here for a long time, because you can move around. So really energizing work that we're doing that makes people also stay here for quite some time.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd love to pivot to talk about some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of hiring strategies and kind of the evolution of talent acquisition as a whole throughout recent years. Jessica, while we're with you, what are some of the trends that you're experiencing and that you're seeing? We'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, strategy is my forte. And so when we think about like some of the trends that we're seeing, really hiring mirrors where the world is going. And I know Dean mentioned this as well. And so we're really seeing an emphasis on technical skills. So like the candidate of the future, like how are they with their technical skills and aptitude and being able to adopt change and pivot and shift and prioritize quickly. In fact, these can be things that, you know, as a prospective candidate, you can add to your resume, you can add when you're on an interview, because that's what we want to see. Like, where is the world going and how quickly can you get there, right? And really having that mindset, right, to go there with where the world is going. The other thing we're also seeing is really having an emphasis on leaders that have a strong sense of emotional intelligence that are able to lead large teams, right? And so Sarah mentioned like Capital One is about the people, right? And that's why we stay here too. But when we look at prospective candidates as well, we really want them to be able to lead and like, do they have emotional intelligence? Do they know what their why is? Are they asking people, hey, how is it going outside of work, right? Because we're all working really hard here, but like we actually care about people, you know, from that perspective as well. So that's what we're seeing here. And so I would challenge people as, you know, they look at like where they want to work and getting their resumes up to date, is to look at like, how are they from a technical skills perspective? I do see a trend on some of the networking sites where people will get a new technical skill and then they update their information on those sites so that you can see, oh, you know, this person got a new technical certificate. Those are really good things to have because the world is shifting and changing so fast that you want to shift and go where the world is going.
Really great insights, and not only continuing to build upon those technical skills because the technology is consistently evolving and changing, but also keeping in mind the IQ and EQ pieces of it as well, and building upon those emotional intelligence competencies and keeping that top of mind, especially for those who may be interested in that leadership track. Great. We're moving right along, and we've covered a ton of ground. I wanted to make sure that I asked a question that's on the top of my list, and it is, what final piece of advice would you leave participants with who are navigating the job market, who may be in the thick of it today? What sort of recommendations would you have for those who are listening in that scenario? Sarah, can we get started with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we briefly touched on this, but just to kind of wrap us up, you know, don't underestimate the power of reaching out to recruiters or associates on LinkedIn. I think when you're in the middle of the job market, it can feel like you are applying to so many roles a day. You're not hearing back. It can be, you know, kind of a frustrating process. So you might feel like, you know, I messaged 20 people today. All it takes is that one, right? All it takes is that one who's like, hey, I do have a few minutes this week. I love your profile. Like, let's connect. So really don't underestimate the power of reaching out. I know myself, I get plenty of messages from other Capital One associates of, hey, this person is interested in your role and they reached out to me on LinkedIn. Do you mind just, you know, either connecting with them via email or if you have time pulling up with them. So all it takes is that one connection.
That's great advice. And it may not be a connection right this minute, right? It could
Yes.
be 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now. But building that connection, building that community can go a long way. That's really great advice. Dean, anything you'd like to add?
I think something that could be a really, really big turnoff at the very beginning of a conversation is when we ask a candidate, what has you looking around right now? Are you just searching around? Or I think it's really important to know things about the company that you're interviewing for. And I know that sounds very, very basic, but candidates, you want to avoid the answer, I just got laid off and I need a job. Right there, right off the bat, the recruiter themselves, they're not going to want to be engaged anymore just from that simple answer. So when you say what you're truly looking for, give the response something along the lines of, I'm actually being very thoughtful for the next step of my career right now. I was just laid off, but when I came across your company, I did do some research before applying to the position. What interested me most was why your company was doing what they're doing, and it made me believe that your company holds the same values that I do, which is why we're speaking today. That right there sounds a lot better than I just need a job, which, by the way, is true, but you framed it in a different context. So I think that that's really important. Know what the company is about before you apply to it. That will definitely pay dividends in the long run.
I hope everybody was taking notes and writing down that quick script. Dean, that's genius. And for those who missed it, we will be sharing the recording and you can rewind and write that down. It does, it makes such a world of difference. And Capital One does such a great job of sharing its mission, sharing its values, sharing the work that they're doing, the people who are making a difference and building the organization. Go out and take just a couple of minutes and go and research and learn and bring a bit of that to the conversation. It could certainly level up that conversation with a recruiter or hiring manager. Great advice. Jessica, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit, but I would say really hone your craft, know your superpowers, and work on truly articulating it. How well do you tell your story, right? So this takes time to like write it down, go step by step. I even ask my recruiters that are on my team, we're constantly honing this. And so like even in some of our meetups that we have, I say, well, what is your superpower? And so like they're also doing that, even people that work at Capital One. But really knowing that and knowing like what will make you stand out and what do you do differently than other people? And what have you done throughout the course of your career and being able to articulate it, right? So it's one thing of like knowing what it is, but practicing, honing your craft, and then like getting it out there in the interview is really powerful.
Which is a wonderful transition for my next question. And at Fairy God Boss, we have a tradition where we like to ask our panelists the following, and that is, what is an accomplishment, personal or professional, that you're most proud of? Perhaps you could share your superpower as well if you felt comfortable doing so. Dean, you're smiling. I feel like you're ready to take this one on first for us. Could you be our first volunteer? If you could unmute, Dean.
Sorry. Yes, on a personal level, I do workouts 6 days a week, and that's something I'm very, very proud of. I've been doing that now for 5 years straight with no breaks except for vacation and when you don't feel well, obviously. But the majority of the time, I do that. Professionally, whenever I joined Capital One, I said I want to do more. So when I became a Tech TA diversity ambassador, I said, you know, other than me just being part of the group, how can I help everyone? I ended up becoming one of the leads of search at Capital One when we're trying to find underrepresented talent at Capital One within Tech TA. And we're looking to make those initiatives to go across the entire enterprise as well. So that's something I'm really proud of, because growing up, I did not have the luxury of having like a lot of money per se around me, and a lot of my friends, people would look at us and they would prejudge us and everything. So whenever I saw that there was an opportunity to give other people opportunities within the job market a chance, I jumped all over it. So I'm really, really proud of that, and I'm really happy to be a Tech TA diversity ambassador at Capital One. I think it's awesome.
You should be proud. Very much something to be incredibly proud of. Thank you for sharing that with us. Jessica, what about you?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. And if we think about, I'll answer your question, Gabby, around superpowers. I think something that I've been working to develop throughout the course of being in TA for 20 years is my storytelling, but also my brand. And so like a personal note, like many years ago, working in another company, I was up for a promotion. Well, I was interviewing for a role. And when I interviewed for that role, it became super apparent to me, and I was a recruiter at the time. I had filled 120 roles, but it became really apparent to me that like I was more than just about the roles that I was filling, and that not everyone knew like exactly what I was doing. And I ended up not getting that role. But it was really more of a blessing in disguise, because what I learned is like, you're only as good as your brand. So like I was working in a silo filling all my roles, but it was more about like, how was I filling those roles, right? And so because I didn't get that role, I said, you know what? I have to work on my superpowers and my personal brand. And from that point on, I made sure to tell my story, and what we do in recruiting is so important, and to build my brand. And so I also teach my recruiters how to do this as well. And that was something that was like, I turned a negative into a positive there. And that's my superpower. It's really telling the recruiting team story. What are they doing? How are we filling our roles? How are we helping solving problems with the business? So I think that is an interesting story I wanted to share. The other thing is I have 2 young kids. I have a son and a daughter. And personally, I love to read. and it's very hard to read with young kids. But I finished a book and I was very proud of that. I finished it by doing some travel on an airplane, and I was very excited about that because it's hard to finish a book when you have young kids. You're always doing something, and so that I was excited about.
That's amazing. Well, the first thing I want to give you kudos for is not only building your superpowers and building your brand, but what I took away from that is you're also helping others climb with you, right? You're lifting as we climb, which is just incredible. And I'm sure your team really appreciates that leadership and that mentorship that you're bringing to them as well. And I can echo that same sentiment. I'm a mom of 2 young children, and I can get to the lots and lots of bedtime stories every night. But reading for myself is a whole lot different. And so kudos on getting through a book that is no small feat. And I'm glad that you also found some time for yourself to read. Last but not least, Sarah, do you mind sharing something you're proud of?
Yeah, absolutely. So goodness, this just happened a few months ago. But recently Capital One has expanded internationally. Within the last 2 years, we created an office in Mexico City. And my team was tasked with standing up a technology development program, which is a program we've had in the US for a decade now, standing that up in Mexico City. And I was tasked with leading the recruiting strategy for that, making sure that, from a product standpoint, everything was systems go, that our recruiting team was trained up on all the nuances, which there were a lot. So this has been a work in progress for about a year now, but really allowed me to be really strategic, collaborate with teams internationally, and really build a program from scratch. So something I had not yet done before. I previously had been leading strategy for a program that is really a well-run machine. So this really kept me on my toes, still keeps me on my toes, but something that we're really proud of.
As you should be, as you should be. It sounds like a massive, massive undertaking, and it sounds like you also navigated it exceptionally well. So very much something to be proud of. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd love to ask a question about any books, podcasts, or resources. Anything you'd recommend to our audience? Maybe, resources that were instrumental in your career progression. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I can start here.
Okay.
Nothing that's like super specific, but just another piece of advice is know your industry. So when I came into tech recruiting in 2018 at Capital One, I had no idea what Python was. Programming languages were, a foreign language to me. And so I knew that I had a lot of work to do. I listened to, podcasts that were centered around like tech for dummies. I tried myself to dabble in a little coding, but it became apparent that I really needed to keep up with tech trends. So nothing specific in terms of career development, but just, seek out podcasts, books, articles that allow you to stay really current in the industry that you're in, because that's really helpful. And it allows me to converse with candidates, but it also allows candidates to kind of converse with me.
That's great advice. Thank you. Dean, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. So my answer is actually going to be really funny. My answer is just Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey is an hysterical comedian. However, if you actually look up Steve Harvey motivational on YouTube or anything, you will be utterly amazed with how inspiring this person can actually be. Whenever Steve says, "Why do you think you keep imagining?" And you're like, wow, it's like, because I have more to do, and that could be from every aspect of life. So whenever I hear little things like that, it really just takes me to the next level. And it's something that I implement throughout the entire day, not just necessarily at work. He'll talk about the way you do some things is often the way you do all things. It's as simple as, do I really want to put the dishes away right now? Well, somebody has to. So let's just do it. Get it done. It's the same thing with recruiting. Do I really want to go over these 38 applications? Just do it. Just get it done. It's the same mentality. So if you're looking for a good laugh, look up Steve Harvey. But if you're also looking for an extra push, you can also look up Steve Harvey. I think it's wonderful. Definitely check it out.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I will check that out. I will check him out for sure.
You'll be shocked.
Jessica?
Well, I don't know if I could follow up after Steve Harvey, but I will try. So since I've had a lot of roles both at Capital One and other companies that I've worked at, I use a book called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins, and that book has a fantastic framework for anyone that is starting a new role. Because it really tells you like how to set up yourself for success, your team for success, and it really gives you a really fantastic framework. So I would say like that is a book that I would recommend that I think is really helpful. And to Dean's other point, and I think Sarah also mentioned this as well, when we think about like I'm obsessed with talent acquisition. So like every night I am going on and I'm looking at articles and I'm staring at data and I'm seeing where the world is shifting. Whatever industry someone is in, you've got to do that, right? It's like outside of your job, just really like consume a lot of materials that are gonna, really propel you forward. And, that's what those of us in talent acquisition do, is we study the market. I study it every single night. And I usually memorize a lot of like data that's gonna help us like get to where we need to go. And so no matter what industry you're in, you want to go above and beyond outside of like the day-to-day, which is like really consuming the materials that are going to make you successful and get you to where you want to be in your career. So these are things we all do in our respective areas.
Absolutely. And there are some similarities between all three of your answers, and whether it's finding some comedic relief or some inspiration, reading an industry white paper or new research publication, or listening to a podcast, the common theme is continuously doing that learning, doing that listening, finding those opportunities, maybe even on a daily basis, to continue to build that knowledge, that skill set, finding that inspiration and that motivation in the ways that fill your cup. And so I appreciate all three of you sharing your advice with us. We have a little bit more time, so I'd love to present another question. And the question is what is the most memorable piece of career advice that you've received? Is there anything that stands out as you reflect on your career?
I have one as a people leader. So I have 5 direct reports or associates that report up to me. But when I was a brand new people leader, I was terrified. I was constantly like, how do I know if I'm doing a good job here, right? Like, how do I know if I'm serving my associates well? And my boss said to me, whenever something goes wrong, you just always ask yourself, what could I have done better? What could I have communicated more clearly? Think about how you could have coached them better, and that will set you up for success the next time it comes around. So understanding that not everything is going to go our way. There are going to be mistakes that happen at work. That's just part of being human. But rather than kind of looking around at the whole picture, kind of focusing on myself and what I could have done in that situation and what I will do next time.
That's great feedback. And it ties back into a theme that we talked about earlier from a leadership and growth perspective, continuing to build on that emotional intelligence piece, right? We're all humans, we're all people, and we're all going to make mistakes, but how you lead through those moments is really, really impactful. And so wonderful advice from your mentor. And I'm glad that you shared that with us as well, Sarah. Thank you so much. Dean, Jessica, any memorable career advice you've received that you'd like to share with the audience?
I have a really, really ironic line that I wasn't expecting to hear it, because I remember the date that it was given to me, and it was given to me on October 12th, 2012. That was my first day as a technical recruiter. My vice president says to me, Dean, it's really important to find the right candidate, but it's more important to find the wrong candidate faster. In other words, learn how to assess the correct candidate and move on, because you can find yourself going down rabbit holes that you can't even imagine. To this day, whenever I teach people how to read resumes, I can still hear that conversation, and it was so impactful. I remember the date that it happened on. So to find the wrong candidate is just as important as finding the right candidate, which is why your resumes are so important. that's why having that information on there, catching our eyes, makes us want to reach out to you. So definitely, that's the best piece of career advice I've ever received by far in recruiting.
That's a great one. Thank you. Jessica?
So I've been so fortunate to have amazing mentors throughout the course of this 20-year career, who they just like helped me get me to where I am. But I think some of them have asked me to ponder, Jessica, what do you want to be known for, right, in your career, and like what is important to you? And I've made a career of going into the hardest things. And so I have had a nickname at other companies like special ops. So like send her into the things that are not going well and she'll be the calm in the storm. And so like throughout the course of my career, I've just jumped into things that were chaotic and messy. And that is where I found the learnings. Now, has it been easy? No. Has it been painful? Absolutely. But what comes out on the other side there is like the beauty of that, right? And so that's something that I had to think about and have become known for, is just going into areas that are chaotic and, putting a framework in, putting a great project plan in, and doing that throughout the course of my career. So sometimes we just need to do hard things. We need to fly into hard things and get them into a better spot. And, there's some beauty in that.
Absolutely. And it's a great question to ponder, right? Especially for those who may be navigating a career pivot or thinking about what comes next in their career trajectory. Pondering on the question, what do you want to be known for? It's a little bit of a unique angle or consideration to really have that exploration moment. And for you, it sounds like you found your forte, Jessica, with being that special operations individual who can come in and bring that strategy and those resolutions and the problem solving. So very cool. I appreciate you proposing and sharing that with us. Well, we made it through such an impactful conversation and so many great questions for this audience today. I want to take a moment to thank our three incredible panelists, Jessica, Sarah, and Dean, for joining us and sharing fantastic advice. And thank you to all who tuned in for the discussion. As a reminder, we will be sending out that recording. So if you didn't have an opportunity to take notes or you want to refer back to that script that Dean shared earlier today, please stay tuned for that. We'll be sharing it with everybody who's registered. We also want everybody to go and learn more about Capital One. You can check out their profile and jobs on Fairy Godboss. Really great insight about career opportunities, the organization, perks and benefits. So please take a look there. And our last ask, we would love to hear your feedback and help us continue to improve our events. If you head to the Typeform tab on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a very brief 1-minute survey. We'd love your feedback for those who are in the audience. Thank you in advance for sharing that with us. And thank you all again. We will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.